Hello and welcome to the Media7 Science Special from the ONG Glen building at the University of Auckland School of Business. In this program, we'll examine the way science is conceived and communicated in the media. We'll look at why science is a harder sell when the news is bad. We'll explore the cultural dimensions of science, and we'll bring you the best and worst reported science stories of the year. But first, Jose Barbosa examines the rise of the science communicator.
It's safe to say that the universe is awesome. And the reason we know it's awesome is because scientists have told us so.
If you can imagine St. Paul's Cathedral as an atom, then the nucleus, which is at the heart of the atom, and where almost all the mass resides, would be smaller than a single grain of sand.
But as with anything, describing and explaining the astounding is an art, and not everyone's a master.
How many digits of pi can you remember? Well, there are several mnemonics which can be used for remembering them. This one is really my favourite. How I want a drink. Alcoholic, of course, after all those formulas involving tangent functions.
Communicating science to the public isn't easy. Even the father of modern science, Isaac Newton, found it difficult. He was a genius, but also notorious for shunning society. In fact, it took 2 years of gentle prodding by friends before he could be convinced to publish his first paper. Contrast that with the avuncular Albert Einstein, who was the first major science celebrity in the 20th century. Such was his fame, he was often asked about subjects he had no expertise in.
What do you think of prohibition, Professor?
Ich trinke nicht, also ist mir das ganz gleich.
It was that prestige that led a group of refugee atomic physicists to ask him to sign a letter to Franklin D. Roosevelt, warning of Nazi Germany's research into atomic bombs. The letter, delivered just before the outbreak of war in 1939, started the American administration down a path that eventually resulted in the creation of the Manhattan Project. If the bomb was the 20th century's emblematic invention, so too was television. It was an invention which expanded the image of the scientist as public figure.
How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? I am Julius Sumner Miller, and physics is my business.
Armed with nothing but the contents of last week's rubbish collection and pants secured tightly just below his earlobes, Miller educated millions of children. His secret was his sincere enthusiasm, which was impossible not to share.
Look at those little rascals.
Science on telly now seems to be a parade of explosions and CGI. But it's worth noting that the best of these programs still have at their core the enthusiastic front person. And that's what elevates the base diversion into a true journey. That simple joy of imparting knowledge, of showing people really cool stuff. And it can, occasionally, be a cautionary tale, warning us of the misuse of science for nefarious purposes.
These are my sperm. Amazingly, about 500 million of them from a single ejaculation. With just this one ejaculation, it should be possible to impregnate all the fertile women of Western Europe.
And you'd be surprised what comes up when you try and Google that episode. It is my great pleasure now to welcome two distinguished men of science, the man you saw just now, Doctor, broadcaster and peer of the realm, Lord Robert Winston, and founder of the Liggins Institute and the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor, Sir Peter Gluckman. Welcome to you both. Now, Professor Winston, the excerpt we saw there was, of course, from one of a string of BBC documentaries that you fronted and helped produce. Do you think that that is a particularly valuable role for public broadcasting?
I think there is a very important role for public broadcasting, because I think in any field what public broadcasting should be doing is to, amongst other things, is to educate. And certainly it's part of the charter of the BBC to do that. It's not the only thing, but I don't think public broadcasting is well served if it's purely there for entertainment.
And do you think that is a danger?
Well, I think good science broadcasting is tricky, but I don't think it's any different from any other good factual broadcasting. I think there are certain things which are needed. First of all, I think you have to... first of all, you don't always need presenters. Much of the time you don't need presenters.
And yet, well, that's an interesting thing, because now it appears that you do need the celebrity presenter every single time.
There's a fashion for them at the moment, but I think the presenter, the reason for having the presenter is sometimes it humanizes what is a difficult area, and sometimes if it's a good presenter, the presenter can actually be, if you like, on the side of the viewing public and can actually tell the lens as if he's talking to an individual. And I think that's what good presenters try to do. I think being quirky is not helpful. I think it's very important not to be pompous. It is absolutely essential to have clarity. And every time, I mean, what I try to do before any piece to camera is to work out the minimum number of words and to be on screen as brief as possible to make a single statement. So I think on the whole, I hope when you see anything that I've broadcast, there would be really one thought behind the statement to lens. And then what you do is to use, I think, the intelligence of the production team, using what is actually one of the best art forms of our society, television, to make a good visual metaphor.
It doesn't sound to me that you're such a big fan of the modern genre of science show which involves blowing things up.
No, I don't. I hate them. Frankly, I think that the whiz-kiddery science I think it does a disservice to science because it doesn't portray science as it really is. It doesn't portray either the intelligence behind the science, and above all, it doesn't trust the audience. And I'm afraid we do this on the BBC a lot. We don't trust the viewing public to be intelligent, and most members of the public are actually intelligent beings. They do have a brain, but we talk down to them as if they can't understand. Of course, they won't understand scientific terms. Why should they? It's not what they should be doing. But there should be a clear recognition that an intelligent broadcast will be treated intelligently.
Now, Professor Gluckman, this I think is the peril of even a show like this. The moment you start talking about the difficulty of explaining science to the public, there's an unspoken assumption there that the public might not get it. The public's a bit stupid.
Well, I think the first thing to say is science is not a list of facts. Science is a process, and I think that one of the things that is lost in the gee whiz shows we've been talking about is it's all about fact as opposed to the process of learning what we do know and, more importantly, what we don't know. I think, particularly in talking about complex science, we have to be honest about what we know, what we don't know, what is knowledge-based and what is values inferred. And I think that particularly in the issues of science in the modern world, a good presenter or a good discussant can explore those issues and honestly separate out the limits of what we know in science, the inferences we make from that, the dangers that come in that process of the inferential gaps, and the values propositions around that which society must opine what to do with the science.
And when you talk about complex science, I assume you're not just talking about astrophysics.
No, I'm talking about
some of the issues you've spoken on in your role.
Very issues that every citizen on the planet is concerned with, whether it's an ageing population, the problems of our youth, climate change, food security, environmental degradation, living in greater urban conurbations, the impact of the wired world and so forth. All these are issues in which you have knowledge, gaps in our knowledge, and they impose on the way we choose to live our lives. So the citizenry has a proper role in opining what to do with what we know and what we don't know.
So how do you do that?
Well, I think one of the problems, I'm talking, of course, about television here and not the issues which we present on television. And I think one of the concerns I have is that now increasingly there is the notion of celebrity presenting television. I regret that. I don't like celebrity. I don't think that that's helpful in fact, getting the stuff across. But it's really encouraged by a large number of media channels. The BBC, I'm afraid, is as much at fault as anybody. And so you end up being seduced, or the presenter gets seduced by his own cleverness, rather than actually by working out the way of best describing something which might be truly awe-inspiring, or seriously interesting, or something which the public who's viewing this can work out for themselves. And I think that's one of the problems, because when you come on to the sorts of issues that Sir Peter's talking about, when you're talking about, for example, climate change, the complex issue is not understanding how climate change might affect us. The really complex issue is understanding the risks and the uncertainty of the risks. And that is a really difficult thing to explain on television. And unfortunately, media channels are not prepared to try to get to grips with that issue, so instead of which they show explosions which don't really ultimately do anything beyond a brief matter of entertainment.
Or they cherry pick one observation to make an artificial contestation of views, which doesn't again give the listening or viewing public a chance to understand how the scientific conclusions have been reached.
And you know, the sad thing, of course, is that television is a wonderfully engaging medium, because on a television screen you can combine the poetry of language, the beauty of a picture, the excitement of what's happening, the pace in terms of the whole production, and the background music, which is very, very rarely done properly. And yet, that's why I say it's an art form. And actually, it should be utterly engaging and compelling. And if we use that properly, which I hesitate to talk down the BBC, but somehow I feel that BBC's really lost its way with that kind of factual programming, and it tends to go, sadly at the moment, for a whiz approach. And I think it's not a good idea. I don't like talking down the hand that's fed me, after all, biting it. But I do think that now, one of the reasons why I'm more and more reluctant, I think, to work on the BBC is because I don't really feel that we're able to really talk about the details of science and the intricacies, and for example, to talk about the downside of science as well as the up value, the value and also the negative aspects. The balance that's needed is very, very difficult to persuade broadcasters, because they don't see this except in terms of audience figures. Absolutely. And actually, I think that you should be able to get very large audience figures for something which is inherently interesting if you had the courage and the trust to do this.
But surely, I mean, you say you hate the idea of celebrity science figures, but
I don't hate the figures. I hate the way it's done.
The idea of does the public not have to have someone that they feel they know and trust speaking to them?
Yeah, of
course.
course.
Particularly when you're talking about the risks of
So why
science.
have a celebrity presenting science is what's happening. So instead of having a scientist presenting the science who knows about it, you have somebody who, for example, drives fast motor cars on Top Gear, who then presents science. Well, I mean, frankly, those people are not scientists, and they don't understand what they're presenting. Now, I think that's... I don't think that does serve science. It doesn't think it serves science well. And I don't think it's necessary, because there are lots of scientists who really can communicate pretty well. There's no shortage of them.
What makes you two good at that? Because you have become general spokespeople for science from quite a similar background. You're both doctors and medical researchers. Is there a bedside manner that doctors bring to the explanation of science?
What we share, in my view, is an enthusiasm. And that enthusiasm is partly for science and partly for teaching. And I think that is a very important issue. And I think we both want to communicate, and we want to be understood. And I think, I think we're both fairly open about, as Peter says, what we don't know. I think that's important too. And I think that's very, very important in front of a camera. What is interesting about a camera is the viewer can tell immediately whether the person, pretty well immediately, whether the person in front of the camera that they're watching actually really knows what they're talking about, or whether they're spouting a script. What's happening increasingly with television companies is that they're using scripts which they present the presenter or whoever to speak to. It doesn't actually work. The reason why you like David Attenborough, and I'm sure you must like David Attenborough in this audience, is because David is telling you what he believes, what he's worked on, what he's thought about. And he's fantastically intelligent. And he is a great communicator because he absolutely is passionate about the subject that he's describing. And so that knowledge and that passion and that wish to teach people, and he doesn't want to be a celebrity. He's not interested in being recognized wherever he goes. What he wants, and he's certainly not interested in money either. What he's interested in is actually getting across something which he believes is really important.
I couldn't agree more. I think at the end of the day, this society won't be a healthy and mature society unless every citizen has some basic science literacy. Not about the facts, but about these big complex issues where science, technology, and the way we live our lives and the health of the planet are all interconnected. And therefore, people like myself and Robert and yourself all have a role in trying to have a better dialogue between the community and the scientific community, such that the knowledge we have and the knowledge we need to have is integrated into the way people plan the future of this world.
Well, hasten the day. Professor Winston and Professor Gluckman, thank you for your time. After the break, why don't our dirty waterways get the headlines they appear to deserve?